And welcome back to Football Weather, folks. Galen, Clavio, Matt Blaszka joining you here on the show. I know a lot of you are waiting for the Indiana football breakdown on Crimson Cast. We will have that over on Crimson Cast, but still here on the Back Home Network after this show. But we got some business to take care of first. I sound like Marge Schott right now. I apologize for that, but it was a loud night at Lucas Oil Stadium, Matt. I don't know how it looked on television, but it was really, really nice in person. How you doing, my friend?
You know, people, I've had so many texts, no, certainly not as many as you, just to be here in Bloomington from fans all over the country, just talking about Indiana football being the number one team in the land. As we start this show today, I'll do my best to carry you today. You have a lot to talk about today here on our show and Crimson Cast, but it's going to be a show for the ages on Crimson Cast. But certainly we have a lot of business to take care of. What happens in the bracket? And where is the final teams land here on the 8, 9, 10, I guess, is where we're going to see. And we have 2 group of 5s most likely in this bracket.
I know. It was a wild day yesterday. And, it was hard to keep up with everything. But a couple of games that really twisted this playoff and are going to change the way we conceived of how the bracket was going to go. And I think, you start off with Duke beating Virginia. And I don't know what the committee's going to do. We're going to find out real soon. But like you said, that may crack the door open for both Tulane and James Madison to get into the playoff. Tulane, what a win for them on Friday as they took down North Texas. I was certainly a doubter of Tulane and a believer in North Texas. And, man, Tulane proved me wrong. Like, they played a hell of a game in that game. And then James Madison struggled a little bit. But, they put some points on at the end. It was really, really engaging watching them play with that fire in that stadium. And it's fascinating thinking about, that was where Curt Cignetti was 2 years ago. And right. It didn't ruin their program, and they may get a shot at the big time. I know a lot of people in college football are not excited about having 2 G5 schools. It's great for the sport. It really is. Right. Like, this sport thrives on hope. And the fan bases thrive on hope. And this is the thing, you might disagree with, are they good enough? Are they not? Watch Breaking Away sometime if you're having those thoughts. But my theory on this is always the same as in the NCAA basketball tournament. If you are able to give smaller teams a shot at the big time, sometimes they rise to the occasion, sometimes they don't. But it's about the journey as much as about what they do when they get there.
Yes, and it's really been interesting seeing the rhetoric on social media about these 2 teams possibly playing for a chance at the national championship. That's exactly what this is for, playing a playoff game. In college basketball, like you said, we have this all the time. And college football hasn't really ever enjoyed that piece of the sport. And so we've had a 2-team playoff and then a 4-team playoff. We had the Boise States in the early 2000s. We had Cincinnati a couple of years ago. We even had Boise State last year, who was a couple plays from really being in that game and potentially winning that game against Penn State. These are, everyone remembers that Boise State went over Oklahoma and how it made people feel not only in Boise, but for us as fans. Like, you'll never forget that play, the hook and ladder and the Statue of Liberty play. Like, those things are in your mind forever, that they won that game against Oklahoma, and it changed the perception for a little bit. And now we have an opportunity that we're going to maybe see 2 of these teams get in. Both of them earned it. I don't want to hear that they didn't earn it. They earned it. I'm sorry, ACC. You have the tiebreakers. You blew this. This is not like Virginia blew it yesterday. That's part of the story here, right? And they have these weird tiebreakers that got Duke in. Yeah. Not Duke's fault. Duke went in, won the game. Good for Duke. But Duke does not belong in this game. I'm sorry. They don't. In this playoff, they're 8-5. They lost to 2 G5 teams, despite what Manny Diaz says, right? They lost to UConn. I guess they are. I don't know. What are they? G5? I think, or they're somewhere in the middle.
I think they technically are in the middle. Yes,
but it's going to be a great day, and I know they're going to be heavy underdogs. But at the same time, Tulane's likely going to play Ole Miss. We have no idea what Ole Miss is going to look like. I know they lost Ole Miss a couple months ago by 35 points. It's a totally different game. Duke just lost to Virginia 3 weeks ago by 28 points. Anything can happen in a playoff setting, especially we have no idea what Ole Miss is going to look like in 3 weeks. They have a brand new coach, no offense. I know they're bringing the offensive coordinator, but it's got to be this weird thing going on. we'll see. But again, and I'm excited for this bracket to be released to see what we get. Hopefully, ESPN does not draw this out for 35 years. But we'll see what happens.
I might not survive it if they do, but it's fine. Another big game yesterday, obviously the SEC championship game, and Georgia was far superior in that game. Although I do want to say this. I mean, we've been questioning Alabama for a while, and they very much looked like a team that didn't belong on that stage, to the point I would almost argue that perhaps Georgia almost ended up looking better than they are by how bad Alabama was in that game. And this is, I think, what's going to be fascinating about however this playoff reveal occurs is the SEC gets a huge amount of deference for how good that their teams supposedly are. And yet, if you look at what happened in the playoff last year, their teams did not perform at a high level once they had to play other teams. As much as Georgia, as I heard in all the podcasts this morning driving back from Indy, it's like, oh, Georgia looks like a championship team. I don't know if they actually did or if they just played a team that wasn't actually that good. Like, to the point where if Alabama played badly enough that they could get dropped out of the field. I don't know that they actually will, but it wouldn't surprise me, and it might be deserved at this point, given how they looked in that game and frankly, how they've looked the last month.
It was really curious when it was at 21-0. It was a 21-0 at one point, and it almost felt like it was 42-0. It never felt like Bama was really in that game at all. Like it looked like Bama they reached that steam like midseason. They looked really good. I think you and I both had them, probably a top 5 team most of the season. And then the last 3 weeks, they lost to Oklahoma. Then they beat Mercer or whatever, and then they almost tripped up against Auburn last week. And so, I know the committee gave them credit for that, whatever.
And they got credit for that, which is still wild. So we give you credit for barely beating a team in a place where Kentucky won a game. Sorry, go on.
And so it's the SEC may be, we've talked about this all year, maybe deeper in the middle. Like there's not a great team. Maybe Georgia, obviously, Georgia is, well, they're the champion, right? So they're the champion of the SEC. They're certainly probably the best team in the SEC, but when you look more closely, now we have a full sample. Alabama has lost 3 times, including it. They've now lost twice by 14 plus points. I'm not saying they should be out, but let's look at that. And one was to a 5-7 team. Ole Miss is 11-1, but they didn't play the hardest schedule. A&M, same situation. Is Vanderbilt's probably been the most even keeled team all year. I know they lost to Alabama early in the year when Alabama was playing really well. So it's really interesting to see how it's kind of played out for the SEC compared to the Big Ten. You watched that game last night at the Big Ten, and those two teams look like the 2 best teams in the country. I mean, going blow for blow. I know it was a low-scoring affair. We talked about it. We thought that was going to happen. That's certainly what happened last night, and it felt like that's what was going on. Like they both were on a different level last night.
It's funny because I was thinking this morning. That's the kind of game that the SEC always used to argue its dominance. Like, it's like, well, there's not a lot of points because the defenses are so good. And, it's just strength on strength. And that's what that game was last night. I mean, that was strength on strength, 2 stacked defensive units, but 2 offenses that have all these tools. And it's, I think, fascinating when you look at the numbers, FPI, FEI, whatever, the numbers bear out what we saw in that game, that those are the 2 best teams in the country. It wasn't a mirage. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody might not get hot in the playoff. That's certainly what happened last year, because I don't know that anybody went in thinking, oh, Ohio State's definitely going to. I mean, they were the 6th ranked team essentially in the playoff last year, but they got it together at the right time. So it's going to be pretty fascinating, I think, seeing how all of this works out today. Obviously, the other question mark is who gets the top 4 seeds. It feels like in some order, it's going to be Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas Tech. I am curious. All that we heard going into the Big Ten championship game was, well, if Indiana loses, they'll probably drop to number 3. If Ohio State loses, they may only drop to number 2. I do wonder if that's what they end up doing, or if they move if they move Ohio State down to 3. I didn't think Ohio State looked bad as much as Indiana just looked really good. Indiana deserves the number 1 seed, but how do you see that potentially playing out with the 2 and the 3 there?
Yeah, Georgia looked really dominant, and as you said, maybe Alabama wasn't as good as we thought they were. But if you watch that game last night, they looked like the 2 best teams. So it's Ohio State's loss is to the number 1 team in the country. Georgia's loss is to the number 10 in the country, wherever they're going to end up being ranked. I think it's really close. I mean, if they go Ohio, I think they'll go Ohio State 3 and Georgia 2. But again, I don't think it's going to be a controversial either way. I don't think there'll be this should happen. But I think you're right. I think they're probably a really hard look, because if you watch that game, you walk away and say, I just watched the best teams in the country. Why are you dropping 1 to 3? Or why are we dropping? What they should just flip spots essentially.
Yeah. You're looking at we got Saban on. I don't know what he's saying right now. But looking at the show, we've got like 9,000 reporters from ESPN all over the country. I'm not sure if that was really necessary. Poor Molly McGrath is on Duke coverage. I don't know how she got the short end of the stick on that one. But as we look at I'm looking at the final rankings here for FPI. I believe that they're out now. And Indiana finishes. I'm going to actually pop this up on screen so that we can all share in this together, because I think this is important, because this is one of the metrics that the committee is using. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit for you folks. Hold on 1 second here. So I think everybody can see this. Indiana, number 1, and they clear Ohio State by 0.6 of a point, so still close. Ohio State second. Huge drop-off in FPI.
Yeah.
Between that and the third place team, which is Notre Dame, who I think is going to get in at this point. That seems, at least I feel fairly confident that Notre Dame's going to be in. Then Oregon, then Texas Tech, and then Georgia. You have to go all the way down to 6th, and they are a full point under Texas Tech. I mean, this is where I'm actually quite fascinated. If Georgia jumps Ohio State, given that gap in FPI between how good Ohio State has been all season, I don't know that they should automatically lose that 2 seed simply because they lost in the Big Ten title game to the number 1 team.
Yeah, you're right. And, looking at that, so man, that's really tight. And that's how tight it was before the game too. It was just reverse, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it just flipped really closely there. Yeah. I mean, like, again, if you watched that game last night, and you looked at both those teams and you're like, yeah, these are like, they're the 2 best teams in the country. It's hard for me to put Georgia not at 2. I mean, if they did, like I said, they went to 2. Even though in FPI they're obviously a lot lower here. I'm just curious if we'll give the SEC that bump because they're a champion, and all these different things. I think it's safe to say Tech is probably at 4, right? I think they're probably.
I think so. I mean, there is an argument for Oregon in that Oregon, they're clearly 2.1 FPI points above Texas Tech. That's not nothing. And Texas Tech does not really have that much on their resume. I mean, their top 2 wins are against the team that's not going to be in the CFP. Now, Oregon doesn't have a win against a team in the CFP either, but Oregon's at least got a little more depth, I think, in terms of overall win. Let me go to resume here. Like, if you look at Oregon, they're 4th in strength of record. Texas Tech is 7th. Oregon's strength of schedule is 17th. Texas Tech is 53rd. So I do think there is an argument there for Oregon to be the 4. But I think either way, one of those teams will be 4, one of them will be 5. It's just a matter of, does Oregon host a game against James Madison, for instance, or is it Texas Tech doing that? They'll end up playing in the next round one way or the other.
Yeah, I think if the Texas Tech BYU game was close, there may be more of a conversation. But since it was found 34-7, whatever the final score was, it was pretty dominant after BYU scored the first 7. So I think they'll stay there. I think they'll have Oregon be one of the host here, and they'll probably, like you said, they'll probably get JMU. And then it seems like from there, right? It was Ole Miss last week. They obviously didn't play. They're probably staying there. And 7 was then A&M, and then 8 was Oklahoma. I think we can agree those are probably the 4 hosts.
Probably. I will say the order is interesting because the more I've thought about it, I don't see what the justification would be for putting Ole Miss above Texas A&M at this point.
We said that last week too. We thought they'd be flipped, and they weren't. They were flipped this way instead. So
but they'll probably keep it as such. They keep things the same, except when they don't keep things the same. That seems to, it's
Yeah.
like, well, we'll do this way, except when we decide that we want to do something different, we can't really justify it. It's a fascinating thing. But yeah, so you look at this, we're just wasting time right now waiting for them to actually get to the rankings. I knew they were going to do this. It's fine.
They said 12. Ross just tweeted 12:30.
12:30. Okay, well, we got some time to kill then. Let's if people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat if you're watching live. We had a couple of comments earlier on here that I wanted to try to get back to. Let's see. Reese was like, "Can we get these rankings, ESPN?" I didn't think to us at any point here soon. So but no, ultimately, they've got their selection principles up: strength of schedule, head-to-head competition, except when they don't want to use it; comparative outcomes of common opponents, except when they don't want to use them; and then unavailability of key players and coaches that might have affected past performance. Which is funny. You look at that, and it's like, well, what has been the issue with the Notre Dame Miami thing since Miami's got like 2 of those items, right? Actually 3 going in their favor. But it is one of those fascinating things where going into this is like 4 primary questions. It's like, what is the seeding going to look like at the top? What is the order of the teams in the middle? Do they just keep it exactly static? Does Duke get in? And I think we'll talk about that next. And then the final thing is what happens with that last at-large,
2
last at-larges. Because what we were seeing today and this morning and a little bit last night was it's basically just Notre Dame, Miami, and Alabama. Who are the 3 that you're going to take? Which, honestly, I look at that and I'm like, you really got to throw Oklahoma in there if you're going to have that debate. Like that 4, you really should be picking 3 out of that 4. The idea that Oklahoma's just in. This is where the Alabama question I find fascinating, because Oklahoma's being in the playoff right now is predicated almost entirely on the fact that they beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa. If Alabama's in danger of not making the field, then what is propping Oklahoma's case up to be in the field in the first place?
Right. We thought about this last week, right? If Alabama keeps, they dropped, and then they lost again this week, got blown out yesterday. Why are they getting this treatment? Because they played the toughest schedule? Is that the reason? I mean, and if we're looking at the eye test, like, has Oklahoma really looked good? Like they've gotten not lucky. You win the game. But these last 3 weeks has been horrendous to watch them play. Like it wasn't like everyone's like, well, IU, they could say, oh, IU, Ohio State. It was ugly. It wasn't ugly. It was really good football. 2 really good teams who moved the ball, but both defenses stopped each other.
Yeah.
Oklahoma can't move the ball. Like they have not moved the ball in 3 weeks, and they won all 3 games. Good, kudos to them. But they're not a great football team. Like that team should be in.
Right.
And then I'm curious what your thoughts on this. So I tweeted yesterday after BYU got blown out. That moves Miami up 1 spot. They're next to Notre Dame. Now I tweeted that right after that game. But after the loss by Alabama, I wonder if Notre Dame then jumps.
Well, yeah, and that's a great question, and there's so many different factors, and really, if you go through, and let me call up the committee rankings just so we've got something visual to show the folks while we look for, or while we wait for the show to get going.
Commercial break.
Commercial. We needed another one of those. Gotta sell some more iPhones and some more Lexapro or whatever they've got going right now. Maybe not Lexapro. Lexapro, are they a sponsor? They should be. Let's look at, if you look at the matrix here. I'm going to call this up on the College Football Playoff Committee webpage. There we go. So you look at what they've done, and this is, you have the last week's rankings over here. It's probably not too visible for those of you watching, but if you can. So you go down the list, and Indiana's going to be number 1, no question. And then we had a question that we already kind of answered. Like, does Georgia jump Ohio State to 2, or does Ohio State just jump 1 spot? My personal feeling there is that should be Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, because I'm not sure how, Ohio State had enough on their resume and is strong enough from a resume perspective that I don't think that Georgia beating that Alabama team is really that justifiable as a means to jump Ohio State. If you have then Texas Tech 4, Oregon 5, then it starts to get interesting. So Ole Miss, it's interesting because they've gone 6-7 to 6-7 to 6. So they look kind of flexible in terms of what the committee really thinks of them and where they would land them. Then they had Texas A&M 7th. And then the order starts to get a little bit wonky. And this is where I think your point is well taken. So Notre Dame was 10th. Should Notre Dame elevate above Alabama because of how bad Alabama looked? Probably. Should Notre Dame elevate above Oklahoma? If you believe Notre Dame is that good, despite not having really beaten anybody this year, and the committee seems to think that that's the case, what's the argument for not having them as the 8th seed or even this, I don't know. I mean, Texas A&M, they're permanently below them, but what's the argument right now for Texas A&M being below Ole Miss? And if that's the case, is there an argument for Notre Dame being above Ole Miss? Like, these are the things where it's like, This is where once you pull the thread on the logic, I think it kind of goes in some odd directions.
Yeah, it's once you start grouping all those SEC teams, because if you take Georgia out of it, because they're going to be in the top 4, then you start at Ole Miss. Well, you have Ole Miss, A&M, Alabama, and Oklahoma, right? That cluster. Like, if you pull back the curtains in your mind, who has the best resume out of those 4 teams? It's really, really tight. And then you add a Notre Dame in there who lost to one of those teams. So, which makes sense why they would be behind there. Hey, buddy.
You got invaders in the studio, Matt?
Yeah. He's so it's interesting how that's going to play out. I don't know where my train of thought was. I know, buddy. Can you? But we'll see. This is live. This is why this is great.
We're gonna take a quick break, just so Matt can clear the studio, and then we'll be back. We're gonna talk more. Reveal's supposed to come in 8 minutes. We're gonna continue this line of thought. Keep putting questions in the chat. We're gonna get to those on the other side of this break. Be right back here on Football Weather.
If you're not listening to Sideline Stories with Trisha Whitaker and Sydney Parrish, you're missing great stories like this.
When you interviewed Signetti, did you know that he was the type of character that he is and so outspoken and just like what we call a soundbite machine?
No, not really, but I did realize in the first phone conversation how he was just so authentic. Literally at the end of the conversation, I'll never forget it. And I thought about Coach Knight a little bit because I'd heard that people asked Coach Knight when he took the Indiana job and they'd say, "Why did you go to Indiana?" And he said, "Because I could win there." So I'm on the phone with Coach Sig, and at the end, I said, "Do you think you can win here?" And he said, "Scott, let me just tell you this. If I have average resources, I will win. Trust me." I remember thinking, I believe it. I really did. And I remember hanging up, and I called President Whitten. I said, "Hey, I just finished up with Coach Signetti," and I said, "Hey, I think he's different."
Sideline Stories is part of the Back Home Network. Subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.
Yeah, if you haven't gone back and watched that episode of of Sideline Stories with Trisha and Sydney, where they interviewed Scott Dolson, I think Dolson was right with that hire, don't you think, folks? By the way, we are brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions. We both got Matt's got the more apropos Indiana Rags to Rose Bowl sweater. Oh, and okay, we've officially got the deal started. Great timing. Indiana, #1, going to the Rose Bowl, and deservedly so. Unanimous #1 in the polls. I'm sure some people will say that Indiana still hasn't beaten anybody, but I'm kidding. But no, that was a professional performance by Indiana. It's going to be fascinating to see who they end up getting matched up against out of the 8-9, and that's where this seeding progression really ends up being a question mark. All right, let's see who they end up putting in at #2 here.
I don't have audio.
Hopefully they're glazing Indiana a little bit on the broadcast. I'm not actually getting a chance to hear it right now. Ohio State.
There you go.
Ohio State is second. Okay, that's what okay. I'm going to give the committee some applause.
Yeah.
That is the right move. Ohio State, by every metric, was significantly above Georgia. And I'm glad they didn't get penalized too much because they did not get upset. They got beaten by a slightly better team last night. But I would have Ohio State as my favorite against anybody in the field right now except Indiana. And I think that they are justifiably the #2 seed in this tournament. What are your thoughts?
No, I think we just talked about it a little bit earlier. I agree. Those two teams are the two best teams. Georgia being at 3 makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, all you had to do was flip them, right? I mean, if it was a blowout one way or the other, you can justify it here. straight game. I mean, real close game to the end, went down to the final possession essentially. There's no reason to change it. Yeah, I agree.
Reese Compton says, who's the most dangerous team not receiving a bye? What would you say at this? We assume that it's going to be Georgia and Texas Tech as the other two. So outside of that, who do you think is the most dangerous?
You know, I would say it's Oregon because they're going to get the path to play Texas Tech. Not that Texas Tech is a bad team, but I think out of the 4 teams with the bye, Texas Tech is certainly below the other 3 significantly. That's been my argument. So Oregon, assuming they're at 5, has a good path to semis. Georgia being at 3, and I don't know if we haven't discussed this yet. That's a really good place because Ole Miss is 6 and the 11th seed is Tulane. They have a nice path to semifinals as well.
Yeah. I would also say Oregon. I know some people are going to say Notre Dame, and I understand why. But this is where I have to look at strength of schedule and strength of record. And I also think Oregon is just fundamentally more talented than Notre Dame. Not that Notre Dame isn't talented, but I think Oregon has slightly more juice in the tank. And so that would be my answer. Notre Dame probably be right behind them as far as I'm concerned. Okay, Texas Tech does indeed get the 4 seed. As we mentioned, Georgia got the 3. So this would set up if the seeding held, and it did not hold last year. But if the seeding held, it would be Indiana, Texas Tech in the semi, and it would be Ohio State, Georgia in the semi. And I believe, Matt, that means that the bowl game that would match up the 1 versus 4 is going to be the Peach Bowl, because I don't think I doubt that they would make Ohio State play Georgia in the Peach Bowl in the semifinal.
If that's I'm unfamiliar with how that works for the semis, so I'm not.
Well, last year we saw that occurring where they seemed to try to not have teams playing what would have been virtual home games, and certainly that would be a little bit of an unfair advantage for Georgia, I would think, in that case. But
because I think last year Georgia went to the Sugar and Texas went to the Peach Bowl.
Yeah, so Oregon is 5th, and again, we kind of figured that was going to be the case, and I think that's just. I mean, I give Texas Tech credit; they won the Big 12, they beat BYU twice, they only lost at Arizona State with a backup quarterback, and it was only by 5 points or something like that. Oregon, I give Oregon a ton of credit. I mean, to win at Iowa and then beat USC and then beat Washington at Washington convincingly to close the season. They've been banged up for the last half of the year. I really think they could be very dangerous in this playoff. It's fascinating here because it's Oregon, Texas Tech. If that ends up being that quarterfinal matchup, that's a great contrast in styles.
Yeah, right. That you have this up tempo versus a very slow, methodical offense. Texas Tech defense is really good, as we saw against BYU, and they've been lauded for that all year. So that will be a really fun one. You can almost. That makes sense. You can almost guarantee that Texas Tech Oregon is probably going to be the New Year's Eve game.
Ole Miss gets the 6, so they did not end up shuffling. So that would match up theoretically. Ole Miss, if they get out of their first round matchup, which will almost certainly be against the G5 school, they would go up against Georgia, who they already lost to somewhat convincingly earlier this year.
Yeah. I think that was at Georgia. I believe that was close early, if I'm recalling, and then I think Georgia pulled away late. You're right. I think Ole Miss is probably going to play Tulane. We're not thinking JMU's going to jump Tulane, right? I think we're probably pretty confident in that.
I would think that Tulane would be the 11, but that's a rematch, is it not? Did they not? They played earlier this year.
Yeah, Ole Miss beat them by 35 early in the year. So
Texas A&M is the 7 seed. So this is pretty much holding to form at this point.
Yeah.
So that should mean Oklahoma is then the 8.
Yeah. And so if they somehow get lumped with those other 3 teams, then we might see a shuffle. If not, then it's coming down to those last 2 spots for 3 teams.
Yeah. So that does set up a hypothetical, or not a hypothetical. The SEC teams love hypotheticals. This would be an actual potential matchup between Texas A&M and Ohio State in the quarterfinal.
Yep. And are we assuming Ohio State goes to Florida then? They're going to Miami?
I would assume that, yes. I would assume they'd want Texas Tech in the Cotton Bowl, and they would obviously have Georgia in the Sugar. Okay, Oklahoma now 8. So Oklahoma will be hosting whoever the 9 seed is. So interesting. And this is where Oklahoma is kind of like Diet Texas Tech, I think we called them at one point this season. Texas Tech. I like Diet Texas Tech. Let's do that. Does not taste like regular Texas Tech. No, heavy defense. Who do they end up playing here in the 8-9 game, Matt?
I'm going to say Notre Dame.
I think it's going to be Notre Dame as well.
Are they going to string this out? Yeah, they're going to string this out.
This is great theater.
So while we're waiting here, the one thing I just noticed too with the Texas A&M being the 7, I think we're right. Ohio State will go to Florida because that would put them at a disadvantage in the semis or quarters if that game was happening to be in Dallas. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that shifts that way for sure. So we know we know the 4. So we know probably where the 4 quarter, like where those are going to be for sure. I think with Georgia or Ohio State going to Florida, Texas Tech going to Dallas again.
All right, so they've really decided to hang out. Alabama is the 9. Oh my!
So maybe it is Miami then.
Oklahoma, Alabama, and the winner faces Indiana. Wow! So you get the rematch of the game a couple of weeks ago, and look, I would have loved just for the theater a rematch with Notre Dame in the playoff. But from a football perspective, I think if you're Indiana, you got to love that draw. That is. But neither of those teams has looked particularly good.
Yeah.
And wow, I'm shocked.
So they didn't touch them at all. So now did BYU drop? Because then you have Miami and Notre Dame next to each other, and if you can't put Notre Dame in there, right? You have to flip them, right? Yeah. You have to.
You would have to.
You can't then make the argument that they're not close anymore. They're right next to each other. So is Notre Dame out?
All right. Well, we're gonna find out here. This is
great radio. Great radio, as they said.
This was well done. This was very well done. All right.
Yeah, that's a.
Thank you for the sound effects, Matt. Just staring at the television screen, people staring at us on YouTube. If you're listening to this afterwards, you're like, what are you guys doing? This is why it's always better to do these live shows in person.
Yeah. Should we start singing a fight song or something? Or?
I think so, yes. Or just some acapella. They're really stretching this. I think that
commercial break.
Maybe we just talk more slowly. Go get the Miami. Notre Dame's out. Unbelievable. Notre Dame's out. Wow.
Oh my God.
Miami flips into the 10 spot. Unbelievable. Wow. Well, this was always a theory that we had that if Miami got up to a point, this would be how they justified not having Duke in the field. And so the ACC gets a team in the field, and Notre Dame ends up paying the price on that. Wow, man. Wow.
I'm shocked, but once BYU got blown out, that had to make it a lot easier for them to move them up. But with Bama getting blown out, I was like,
I mean,
does that move them down?
There's somebody in our comments, and actually it's Justin, great point. The 2 teams that beat Notre Dame facing off in the 7-10.
Oh, I didn't even say. I guess I wasn't paying attention. Wow, that's great. So the Notre Dame Bowl, yeah.
What's ironic about there was a comment way up at the top here, and I don't know if this was actually true or not, but Sergio, who is mysteriously no longer in the comments, said something like Notre Dame in the hypothetical odds had better odds against. Oh, here we go. Notre Dame is actually favored versus the entire playoff field, sans Indiana and Ohio State. And again, metrics wise, if you look at FPI, that was the reality. Like they were 3rd up there. But man, Notre Dame. Notre Dame. Those of you who don't like my pronunciation, was having you grow up in Central Indiana, you pick up some odd pronunciations. But for the Irish, this is the wake up call. We've been asking for 2 years. Does not being in a conference hurt them? And they got surpassed, but in a weird way. Let's be honest. They get surpassed last week by an Alabama team that has not played well and then just got smushed in the SEC title game, and a Miami team who didn't play this week either. So I am actually quite shocked at this development.
I thought for sure they would drop Bama after getting blown out, but they are now. So I guess if you're in the field, they're making this point that you're in the field, you had to play the extra game. We're not going to drop you. I guess that's the point they're making, where BYU wasn't in the field, don't have to really worry about it, right? And they got smoked twice by the same team. Bama did beat Georgia earlier in the year, so there is already that precedent that they won that game against the number 3 team in the country. But wow, Miami's been climbing for weeks. I'm not saying Miami didn't earn it, but Miami felt like they should be in. They're a really good football team. They didn't lose to bad teams. They lost to teams that were right on the fringe of the top 25 or in the top 25 at some point this year. They earned it. They played really well. There's
Tulane, who came in 20th in the rankings, is 11 seed. So a rematch between Ole Miss and Tulane. I want to go back to a comment that A.R. Dalton had. Not afraid of Alabama, but how they justify a 3-loss team getting in. This is like one of those basketball resumes where you've got a ton of great wins and you've got more losses than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what they look at with Alabama, if you go back and look at what they did this year, whatever you think of them, they beat Vanderbilt, they beat Georgia at Georgia, they beat Mizzou, who's probably still in the rankings. They had a nice cadre of wins that were relatively highly ranked, and they never really got punished for losing to Florida State. That would have been hard to justify if you had excluded Miami, but they didn't exclude Miami, so that made it more palatable. James Madison is in as the 12 seed. They'll be traveling to Autzen to take on the Oregon Ducks.
What a moment. What a moment. That's awesome.
Good for them.
That's awesome.
Possible rematch between IU and James Madison in the semifinals.
Wouldn't that be something? Jeez.
Not really a rematch, but
yeah. No, I mean, just to get, we talked at the top of the show, but to get both these teams in there, I mean, they're definitely long shots to win a game. But just it's so great for the sport, right? We have 6 conferences represented instead of 5 this year. So we only have we have 4 teams from last year that were in the playoff field. So 8 new teams. Is that right? Oregon, Indiana, Georgia, and Ohio State were in the field last year. Everyone else is new.
That's right. So that's quite a bracket. So it'll be Oregon hosting James Madison with the winner facing Texas Tech. Oklahoma hosting Alabama with the winner facing Indiana. Ole Miss hosting Tulane with the winner facing Georgia. And then A&M hosting Miami with Ohio State playing the winner of that. Notre Dame, the first team out. BYU, the second team out.
Yeah,
so that means I'm guessing Vanderbilt was the third team out, I would suppose.
Yeah, Vanderbilt and probably Texas from there. Probably.
I think so, yeah.
And to the comment about the third loss earlier, they're playing this extra game, and we talked about it in a couple of pods throughout the year. We got to start retraining our brains that not always the loss number, right? There's more to it than just that. So we're slowly getting there as a sport that sometimes losses are good losses, but you also have to win some games as well. Notre Dame, at the end of the day, didn't beat anybody, right? Their only win was against USC.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And this is where I think we talked about this in September on Football Weather about how Notre Dame was going to have to do what Indiana did last year, which was be overwhelmingly good against their schedule because their schedule was going to do them no favors. And it's a little hard luck for the Irish because I think that they really thought that Pittsburgh win was going to be enough, and then Miami beat Pittsburgh by slightly more, and then Pittsburgh falls out of the rankings. The ACC teams they had on their schedule were just no good. I mean, that the bottom of that conference dragged everybody associated with the conference down, including Notre Dame, who handcuffed themselves to the ACC, 20 years ago?
Right. Well, I mean, and Cristobal, who was on a tour all day yesterday, I think I was listening to Ari and our what's his name, Staples, and they were talking. He said they played 5 of the worst defenses, or 5 defenses under 100, ranked 100 in the country this year. So some of these things that that came to bear fruit here for Notre Dame. Certainly, playing all these bad teams, they beat the last place team in 3 of the Power 4 conferences. Like they're a very good team. It's a really tough out for them. But it does feel justified that we are honoring the head-to-head here with Miami beating Notre Dame. No matter when it was, the game still happened. And I think that's an important takeaway for the sport is we have to continue to honor what's on the field and just not come up with everything being hypothetical or numbers-based. Head-to-head has to matter.
It has to matter. And again, I mean, a lot of people in the comments like join a conference, Notre Dame. I've had literally 6 people have texted me almost exactly that in the last 5 minutes. And this is the thing. It's Notre Dame's approach works if they beat Miami and or beat
A&M.
Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Or if they beat USC on the road as opposed to having that game at home. But it is such a, if they lose any of those games or all of them, it's such a hyper thin needle that or line that they have to walk. And ultimately, when you don't have a lot else on your resume, there's no depth there. And yeah, you've got to honor the head-to-head when it happens, and you have to put yourself in a position where you can accrue an extra loss, but you got to have some better wins. And this is where, as much as people criticize the Big Ten, the fact of the matter is, like, Indiana played Oregon at Oregon and won, and they played Iowa at Iowa and won, and they played an Illinois team that I think is still going to be in the CFP top 25 rankings and was 9th in the country. Like they had more depth even in the middle. They didn't play the really bad teams from a defensive perspective that the Irish played. There's just a bunch of that you see in all of this, and I find it fascinating because I think it's hard to change these things right away from a scheduling perspective. These games are scheduled years in advance.
Yeah.
But this is why if you're going to have a committee that's selecting a smaller number of teams, just the back and forth of winning games against and losing games against other teams in a large conference gives you a baseline that the Irish just can't ever regularly hit. And they almost didn't hit it last year. I mean, it was one of those things where they were clearly a good enough team that they made it to the final, but they were underseeded given where they probably were because of that lack of depth in their resume. So
Right. And so it's something we'll talk about here in the offseason as I'm working on something here, but the window for Notre Dame's scheduling is getting a lot harder because all the conferences are going to nine conference games, and they're going to avoid playing any more than 10 Power 4 schools. Most likely, maybe some will play to the 11. But they're, like you said, they're tied to these 5 ACC games. And looking at their schedule next year, not that we're going to get into this today, it doesn't line up very well. I mean, they are playing Miami, but that's really about it. Or in the USC, obviously, but that's really about it after that. So they have to kind of figure out what they want to do, I think. And I'm not saying this is going to drive them to a conference. It may be the tipping point that they got left out. But at the end of the day, if you're honest with yourself, the reason you're behind Miami is because you lost the game. It's not because it was all metrics based. It was because you lost the game. And if you want to argue other teams, that's certainly an argument. But in terms of just that makes more sense to me.
And we had a question. In your opinions, what's the biggest trap game potential?
I think it's either. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Of the first round.
I'm thinking Tulane here, just because I think we don't know what Ole Miss is going to look like, and Tulane just won, be a really good North Texas team. They're coming in high. I know there's a game with no coach there. I guess there's a coach now, but 2 different coaches for that game, right? But yeah, Tulane has been pretty good all season. I know they lost earlier, and that's one of those maybe look ahead spots that maybe Tulane gets off to a good start. They've earned it. They've earned it. I like Tulane to be kind of that look ahead that team.
I'm going to go with Miami, Texas A&M. I think this Miami team probably feels like they got a second lease on life, and they have a really good offense. Mm-hmm. They have dudes on both lines of scrimmage. And I think that there's a lot of question marks about Texas A&M. And it's a very similar thing to the Notre Dame situation, where if you really start to excavate Texas A&M's resume, there's not much there. They beat Notre Dame, who's not in the playoff. These are the other teams they beat: Texas San Antonio, Utah State, Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida, Arkansas, LSU, Missouri, South Carolina barely, and Samford. There's not a team sniffing the college football playoff of the teams that A&M has beaten. Whereas with Miami, I mean, we saw them beat Notre Dame. We've seen them play poorly at times, but they have also had, I think, they have more potential than what they've been able to show against that ACC schedule so far. So that would be the one of the opening round games that I'm going to have circled to say I would not be shocked if the Hurricanes walk into College Station and come out with a victory there.
Yeah, and I mentioned the 3 seed having a nice path, but the Ohio State, if they do get Miami, that's a really banger of a game for a quarterfinal game. I'm with you with this A&M team. They got to show it. They certainly were really good all year. Not taking anything away from them, but they haven't beat anybody, and so they've gotten sort of the Indiana treatment here at the end of the season for how far they end up dropping from 2000, from last year. So let's see what they're made of. Can they win this game against Miami, who, like you said, Miami's going to be really hot coming in. Like they've been playing well for about a month now.
Yeah.
Okay, the Lions.
Manhattan Hoosier has the line. So Alabama -1.5 at Oklahoma. That's
feels
fair.
right. Yeah.
A&M a 4.5-point favorite against Miami. I might jump on that right now. Tulane at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss a 17.5-point favorite in that game. I might jump on Tulane on that. That feels like a bit of a big margin. And then 21.5 Oregon over JMU. That almost feels too small. As much as I love this JMU story, if Oregon can get healthy over the course of the next couple of weeks, that's going to be a real tough team to play in the college football playoff. So, and it's a great, as Justin points out, it's a great home field advantage, and that'll certainly be a far tougher environment than James Madison has probably played in their power, like they joined the FBS probably.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And so we get 4 new hosts, right? We had the 4 brand new hosts from last year, which is even better. We haven't talked about this too much, but we talked about earlier in the year how like it's. I really hope that at some point they get the 1 through 4 seeds also get this chance to host as well. So I think it's just so cool that you get that opportunity to have a football game on your campus. Now, none of these are likely snow worthy like we had last year at Notre Dame or Ohio State. Like we're gonna have the Southern Wing this year, but all of these are going to be great environments. Like the Ole Miss environment is going to be electric based on what happened there. Oregon, you were there this year. You mentioned how great of a home field that is. A&M, 100,000 people in there, and then Oklahoma, also a good home field advantage. So it's going to be really fun to see these stadiums in 2 weeks hosting playoff games.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts for the draw? I don't want to belabor things too much. We also got to get to Crimson Cast here.
Yeah.
But anything else that sticks out to you or is surprising? We're not hearing the debate or whatever. Although someone just texted me, Kirk is insufferable. I was like, okay, the sun came up this morning too. I guess some things you can just count on. But anything else that you glean from this, or anything that you are looking at now that we know what this draw is going to be going into the playoff?
I think overall the committee did a pretty good job. Like, I mean, it's not an easy job. You're always as you do the bracketology for basketball for years. That the last 3 spots are always tough. No matter what you do, you're going to leave somebody out that probably had a shot or needed one more win. But at the end of the day, all these teams that didn't get in, if you win the one more game, you're in. So like everything is on yourself for the most part, right? Maybe not the James Madison, Tulane's. They had to have certain circumstances, but I think the committee actually did a pretty good job of selecting this field.
My only complaint with the committee is that their internal logic didn't make a ton of sense. If you felt like Miami was better than Notre Dame, now nothing really materially changed between this week and last week for either team.
Yeah.
And the idea that, well, we have to have them right next to each other in the rankings before we can justify looking at head-to-head is crazy. I'm sorry. That is not a good way of going about things. Now, obviously in committees, you're dealing with a bunch of different votes. You're dealing with different people's perspectives. There is no like, this is what the committee thinks. It's a bunch of individual opinions that have to coalesce into something. But I just feel like a lot of the internal logic that committees get wrapped up in just becomes so inconsistent. I think they ended up landing on mostly the right order. I might have put Miami above Alabama.
Yeah.
But I think the order does make sense taking all the different factors in. And there's a couple other things I'd quibble with. So I don't so much have a problem with the teams that they got in and the teams they got out. I have more of a problem, and it's kind of, perhaps I don't, to the question, do you think they sandbagged on Miami, Notre Dame for drama? I honestly don't think the committee does that stuff for drama. And I know people say that in the basketball one. It generally doesn't work that way. Who knows with the football committee, because it's a much different kind of setup. But my big thing is there needs to be consistency week by week in terms of what you think the power of certain teams is. Whatever made you rank the Irish in the playoff before, nothing really changed from last week to this week or 2 weeks ago to this week.
Right.
And that's where I have a problem with it, because it just doesn't make a ton of sense when you write it down on paper, like the way that the changes went. But again, at the end of it all, they got the bulk of it right, and they've had the bulk of it kind of in generally the right order for a while. I thought they did a great job with Ohio State at 2. I thought they did a great job with 5 through 8. So, yeah, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, you made a great point, like with the Notre Dame thing. Like, they almost, and we've said this a couple weeks too, like they do too many rankings. Like, you almost need to wait till every team plays 10 games so you have all these data points, because you had Miami at 18 in the first one, right? And then so they were 8 spots behind Notre Dame, which didn't make any sense originally. And so, like, not that many things have changed in the last. I mean, yeah, certainly some games have changed, but yeah.
Miami went 18, 15, 13, 12, 12, 10 in the rankings
over 6 weeks or whatever, 5 weeks. Yeah.
And Notre Dame went 10, 9, 9, 9, 10, 11.
And nothing's really changed for Notre Dame outside of blowing out Stanford last week, and that was it. They dropped blowing out Stanford, whatever the was it, 49-10 or whatever the score was last week. So yeah, I think they need and I know they love this show, like this weekly show, but it's almost like they need to wait a couple more weeks, and so they're not pigeonholing themselves or oh crap, we messed this up, and now we got to figure out how to get this team further up where they're supposed to be starting from scratch every week, and because they're the new data point and all these other things, and so. It's almost like we need more consistency, more explanation. Like this chair seems like he doesn't really, not the greatest of speakers, putting out the points he wants to put out there. And we've seen that over time. But at the end of the day, it's a good field. It's going to be a really fun playoff, I think, this year. I don't want to hear about blowouts because JMU and Tulane are in there. We had blowouts last year in the first round. It happens in every sport. That's just part of sports. It happens.
Exactly. Well, let's go ahead and wrap on this. We will come back probably next week and do a preview of the first round games. Okay, here we go. Indiana is definitely in the Rose Bowl. I was right, Matt. Indiana in the Rose Bowl, and the winner of Texas Tech. So Texas Tech is in the Orange Bowl. Ohio State's in the Cotton Bowl.
Wow.
And the winner of the 1-4 bracket will be in the Peach Bowl.
Okay. Yeah.
So there you go. Yeah. Alabama, Oklahoma is going to be December 19th in Norman, and then the 3 games, you got Texas A&M, Miami at noon, Ole Miss, Tulane at 3:30, and Oregon, James Madison at 7:30 on the 20th. Indiana's January 1st. Ohio State versus the winner of A&M, Miami, and that's why, by the way, Ohio State isn't going to the Orange Bowl, because they don't want Miami in the Orange Bowl playing against Ohio State.
Wasn't the same thing for Texas A&M going to Cotton Bowl? Yeah,
great point.
I guess that they're damned to do damage. I know.
There.
Yeah.
Actually a great point. Yeah. Well, Ohio State now has a beef with the committee, I guess. That's amazing. It's wild. This is part of the problem with these preset places. Like you only got so many places to go. So
right. So I mean, it was a lose-lose. I didn't even think about that. Either spot they put them, they were going to have to travel to either Miami would be there or Texas would be there. So it makes sense, I guess.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Matt, as always, a pleasure doing business with you. And thanks to everybody for jumping on here on Football Weather as we get the playoffs. Go, yes, the Hoosiers, the number 1 seed. I'm going to take about a 5-minute break. I'm going to get Scott on. We're going to start Crimson Cast at 1 o'clock Eastern. So stick around on the Back Home Network. We'll see if my voice survives all of this. And we'll be back next week to talk about the playoff matchups here on Football Weather. For Matt Blaszka, I'm Galen Clavio. This is Football Weather. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.